Yeah, trendsetter, whoa, league of my own, it don't get better. No, read what I wrote, I'm a bestseller. Yeah, reach for my goals, hit it dead center, hit it dead center. Bullseye, hit it the most, is no misses. Something like fish in a barrel, it's no different. Blindfold on me, I still got the most vision. Trendsetter.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Carnivore Evolution. Today, I'm very excited and happy to have as our guest Dave Reed from Canada. He's got a lot to tell us about his carnivore journey, how he's defeated many autoimmune diseases, put them into remission, how he was bedridden for 10 years prior to the diet, and he's lost over 240 pounds. Dave, welcome to our show. How are you doing?
Happy to be here. Doing pretty good.
Thank you, thank you. And we'd love to hear you tell us your story. Please, let's get started. Tell us where it all began.
Okay. Well, I started getting sick in about 2006, 2007, and it progressed rapidly. It started with weird little issues, delays in initiating swallowing, and issues with my feet were feeling odd and they couldn't pick them up right. And they seemed to be mystified. It took them a long time to figure out what it was. And along the way, they discovered all these autoimmune diseases I had. And then they found the final autoimmune disease that I was officially diagnosed in 2012. By then, I'd already been in a wheelchair about 5 years.
Oh my gosh.
But I could still stand unassisted, and I could walk around a little bit, get to the bathroom, that kind of thing out. So, I could still move around, and I was still leading a relatively normal life in terms of sleeping and eating and being up and that kind of thing. So, at the time I was doing lots of computer stuff. So, I was able to grab a laptop, hook it up to the TV, and sit on the couch and work, right? So, but it started getting worse. And by the time they diagnosed me in 2012, I could no longer speak. I couldn't swallow solid food.
Oh my
I could
goodness.
barely breathe. It took all the effort I had to be able to breathe. I was living on liquid diet only, not like a feeding tube or anything like that. It was just like something I did on my own. I used to take like the carnation meal replacement mix in milk, and that was not realizing I was doing more damage to myself. But yeah, so I was in pretty bad shape, but I couldn't stand or walk unassisted. It took one or two people to get me up out of the wheelchair. And so he ran some tests. The new specialist I saw that day knew exactly what it was, and immediately put me in the hospital. And they did some x-rays, and they discovered that first of all, the main autoimmune disease that causes most of my issues is called myasthenia gravis. So it actually causes severe muscle weakness. The immune system seeks out, attacks, and destroys acetylcholine, which is a chemical the nerves use to communicate with the muscles. So that was kind of where all of that was coming from. The other autoimmune diseases I have are ankylosing spondylitis, Sjogren's disease, osteoarthritis, psoriasis, eczema, and issues with my thyroid. So it hasn't been confirmed it's Hashimoto's, but from everything I've read and the way I was reacting to trying to deal with my thyroid, and my mom also had Hashimoto's, so I suspect I've probably got it because it's also autoimmune. So so anyway, when they found they did the x-rays, and they found that my thymus had not only not atrophied after puberty, it had completely reactivated and had split into several pieces, which is why I got so sick so fast.
Oh my gosh.
Because your thymus, for people that don't know, your thymus activates at puberty and builds your immune system, a strong, independent adult immune system. Once that's complete, then that organ is supposed to just kind of atrophy and stop doing anything. But in my case, it stayed active. Now, I actually had myasthenia gravis when I was 13, and my mom took me to a naturopath who, using diet and vitamins, put it into remission, which lasted almost 30 years. But when it came back with a vengeance. So they did a treatment on me, or a series of treatments called plasmapheresis. So basically, they put in a central line that went down to my heart. They pulled out my blood, separated the plasma, because that's where the stuff lived that was doing the bad stuff. So then they replaced it with sometimes donated plasma, sometimes artificial, sometimes both. And basically, I got a full oil change 5 times. And at the end of that, it was absolutely a miracle. I mean, I could walk, I could talk. I was still weak because I'd been, in a wheelchair for how long, right? And hadn't been using my muscles. So I was weak, but I could walk and talk and eat and everything. But it didn't last long. So they did another one 3 months later, and then they sent me to surgery immediately, so to remove the thymus. And because at the time I was 540 pounds, they couldn't use laparoscopic instruments. They had to actually crack me open like open heart surgery. And that was pretty brutal. Now, at the time, my neurologist, who fellow by the name of Dr. Siddiqui, out of Edmonton, Alberta, and he's actually one of the world's foremost specialists on myasthenia gravis. He's developed most of the current treatments or advanced treatments being used to treat it. And he told me that I would need to be on medication for the rest of my life, several medications, as a matter of fact, like immunosuppressants and pills to replace the acetylcholine, and pain pills to manage the peripheral neuropathy in my feet that developed from the autoimmune disease, that kind of thing. And that, he said, even with surgery, it's a extraordinarily small percentage that would ever get anywhere near remission. And because of the severity of my case, he didn't feel there was any chance I would ever achieve any kind of remission. His best hope was that I could be kept stable and alive on vitamins, or not vitamins, prescriptions. So at one time I was on 19 prescriptions. Now, granted, only some of those were from him. The rest were from like my family doctor. About half of the medications were for side effects of the other half. It was just insane. I mean, they had me on extremely high doses of something called hydromorph, which is like a concentrated morphine. I was on really high doses, time release stuff for like 15 years. So that was my first stumbling block. I had to get off that pain meds. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't remember anything. It was terrible. I was spending about after I got out of the hospital, once the plasmapheresis stuff wore off, then I was pretty much bedridden full time, and I spent 14 to 16 hours a day in bed.
Oh my gosh.
And then my wife would come and help me get into the wheelchair and get me out to the couch, and I would sit there for a little while, watch some TV, maybe try and eat, and usually nod off, and then she'd take me back to bed. And that was my life for 10 years. And I honestly contemplated taking my own life on several occasions. I didn't want to live like that because it wasn't living. It was just existence, and it was a pretty terrible existence. But I decided, let me try one last thing. The one thing I could remember was back to when it had been put in remission the first time. So I knew it was possible. So, but I couldn't ask my mom the treatment the doctor gave me, because by that time she was in the middle of full-blown Alzheimer's and could barely remember me most of the time, let alone anything that happened in my childhood. So I couldn't ask her. And once I got off of the morphine and was able to think and remember what I studied, I started researching. And I tried all kinds of things. I tried different types of meditations. I tried sound therapy. I tried self-hypnosis, all kinds of things. And some of it helped a bit. Some didn't, some more than others. But I was determined to use what worked. And then I started researching vitamins, and I was trying different vitamin therapies and stuff. And that had more of an effect. I got to where I could get off a lot more of the medications, and I could get up and walk short distances unassisted, which was nice. I mean, I could get to the bathroom on my own. I could walk down to the van on my own, drive somewhere, and go into the bank and come home. Right? I could manage that barely, but at least it was something, and it was progress. And I was also working on losing weight. I'd lost a fair chunk of weight by this point because I had tried the keto diet to lose weight, and it was definitely helpful for losing weight, and I was starting to feel better, but it wasn't doing anything for the autoimmune stuff, unfortunately. And when my weight loss got stuck back in December, or actually October 2022, I started researching, and then in December of that year, I ran across a video by Dr. Barry about weight loss when you're stuck. And halfway through the video, he starts talking about healing autoimmune disease with the same diet. And something inside me clicked. It was like a switch flipped in my chest. And I immediately knew this was the answer I was looking for. I don't know how I knew or why I knew exactly. I had some suspicions, but won't get into that here. And I talked to my wife about it for a few days, and she was very against it. She, her head was filled with all the same stuff everyone else gets about nutrition growing up. And she was convinced it was going to kill me. And finally I told her, I said, look, I'm going to die soon anyway if I don't do something about this. I can't live like this anymore, and I won't. So I've got to try this. I'm sorry you don't agree with it, but it's my body, and I've got to try. And the magic happened fairly quickly. Like, I jumped in with both feet, like somebody. It's typical for somebody with Asperger's. We tend to make a choice and then just dive in, and go the full rabbit hole route. So I jumped in. Of course, I got the keto flu. So I was sick as a dog because I used to drink a lot of sodas, and even on keto, I was still drinking sodas, right?
Mm.
And I had seen some videos about how artificial sugar was more harmful than sugar, so of course I was, drinking full bore sodas, and so that certainly wasn't helping the situation. But once I switched to carnivore for a couple of weeks, the weight loss restarted. But the first big clue that something pretty cool was happening was I got up after about 2 weeks. I got up in the morning, walked out to the living room, reached for my vitamins, and realized, hey, my wrist doesn't hurt today. My hands don't hurt when I move them. This is wild. And I actually started studying the backs of my hands and my ankles and my feet, and I could see veins and tendons for the first time in decades. And the swelling was just gone. And it seemed to happen overnight. I'm sure it wasn't overnight, but that's how it felt and seemed to me when I was experiencing this. And about that time, I had to go for, I think, a blood, no, that was a doctor's appointment of some kind. And when we got back to the building, the elevator was down. So I was forced to walk up 2 flights of stairs. 1 floor, but it took 2 flights. They were like tall floors. And it took me both hands on the rail, all the strength I could muster. It took me about 15 minutes to get to the top. And I was so exhausted and worn out, I couldn't move off the couch for about 3 hours. And a few days later, I'd gone to a doctor's appointment, and then he had wanted me to take some blood tests. So I made the appointment. And then a few days later, went and got the blood tests. And had to climb those same stairs again because the elevator was down again. Now they were fixing what had broken the other day. And this time I was able to walk up one hand on the rail like a normal person. It took me a couple minutes, and I recovered in about 10 minutes once I sat down and rested in the apartment. My wife looked at me, I looked at my wife, and we both kind of went,
Yeah, it's great.
if you're not seeing the video, we both had like a shocked look on our faces. Couldn't believe what we had just witnessed. And at that moment, my wife was suddenly okay with carnivore.
Oh, that's great.
And stuff started healing from there. I actually had the blood test was actually for my neurologist, and I had an appointment with her over the phone a couple days later. So exactly 1 month to the day from starting carnivore, she declared me officially in remission and took me off the last of my autoimmune medications.
Excellent.
But by the way, she was a new neurologist I had because my old neurologist fired me when I kept asking about alternative therapies. So she was a little more open. So, and she was willing to work with me. So, I tell her, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try these vitamins. This is what I'm doing. This is why. This is what the research says. Keep an eye on my blood. Come up with some tests that we can do to make sure this is working. And she was willing to work with me. Some doctors aren't, but she was great. She's a fantastic neurologist. Absolutely loved her. So she actually worked out of the same office floor, just as my old doctor. But yeah, she was pretty shocked when all of a sudden everything was gone and I was in remission. And she was like, how on earth did you do this? Because I hadn't told her about carnivore yet. And that's why I'd called her for the blood tests. I said, I'm doing something new. I need to do the blood tests. I think it's doing something. And she saw that, and she was like, I don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it. And when I told her what it was, she was like, well, I can't support that officially. However, if people ask the right series of questions in the right way, she sends them my way.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
That's quite an endorsement. That's excellent.
Yeah, I was pretty shocked, but she'd seen me go through this process of just by my own bootstraps getting off the morphine and off the medications one at a time, and I was making all this progress. So she was kind of buying into the fact that I was determined to do this, and very supportive. And I give her a lot of credit for helping me find my path. But over time, over the next few months, my autoimmune diseases just seemed to fall by the wayside. The only one that still bugged me for quite a long time, actually until fairly recently, was the eczema. I'm very, very sensitive to foods I shouldn't eat. So if I get even a microscopic amount of seed oil, it will spike my arthritis. I'll be in pain within an hour and sick for days. And if I eat another, like if I accidentally get some spices or something, then that'll trigger my eczema.
Do you do dairy?
I when I first went carnivore, I did not. And when I was about a year carnivore, I had a short dalliance, very disastrous short dalliance with dairy. And it actually got me back into craving sugar and stuff. And that was bad news. And I started putting on weight. And I got into making all these fancy sauces because I was craving some of the older foods that I used to have before carnivore. So I was trying to make, gravies and all this kind of stuff that were carnivore based. And yeah, technically they were carnivore based, but for me, I can't get away with it. Many people can, but I started drinking when I was 10 years old. So I've got like an addictive cycle in my personality. So I have to be extremely careful with
Yeah.
anything that can cause addiction. And of course, a lot of people aren't aware that milk contains not only lactose, but something called casein, which is an opiate-like substance
Yep.
designed to make the calf crave more milk. So,
Very true. Very
and it
true.
has a similar effect on humans.
Yes.
So,
I've been there, been through the same cycle, same
yeah.
issues, and
You know,
went
I
into
had
remission too.
I had a wonderful lady, midlife carnivore, who tried to warn me, and I didn't listen.
Mm,
And I really wish I would have. But sometimes, as carnivores, sometimes we just have to find out things for ourselves. It's just
yeah.
humans are like that. So, but yeah, and I mean, the healing just kept on. I mean, I had extremely high blood pressure. They had one of those machines that read me for a week every half hour. And in the first day, actually, while they were setting it up, they just barely got it finished setting up, and it spiked a reading of 216 over 175.
Oh my gosh.
And
That's
I
like
was getting
stage
readings like
4.
that regularly. And when they saw the results of that, of course, he wanted to put me on medication for it right away. But by then I had started carnivore. So I said, well, just give it a little time and we'll see what happens. And it turns out I didn't need the medication. So,
Wow.
uh, yeah, that, which, kind of shocked my doctor, but he couldn't figure out how I suddenly didn't need it. But, so yeah, my high blood pressure went away, and, I noticed at about 4 months carnivore, my bipolar started getting a little less. Not the swings weren't as bad. And by 6 months, I suddenly realized one day I hadn't had an episode in a while, and I haven't had one since. So my
Wonderful.
bipolar is completely gone. I was diagnosed at
Excellent.
19 officially. They had me on medication. I actually spent time in mental hospital while they balanced me on the medications. And I didn't like what it did to me, so I stayed on the medications for about a year and then went off of them and didn't use them after that. I did find some natural products that worked while I used them. Something called Empower Plus from a company called True Hope. The people that started it are actually friends of mine. I went to church with them,
Mm.
and it works very well for bipolar. But that was the only medication I used after the first year was that natural supplement. And then when I went by the time I went carnivore, money was really tight and I couldn't afford that stuff anymore. So uh, the carnivore was a real blessing in that way because it just 6 months and it was gone, never to return. And that was a big one for me because the mood swings could get pretty bad, when they were bad. I mean, in a day I could go from on top of the world, nothing could stop me, to suicidal in just a matter of hours. It was crazy stuff. And I dealt with that, most of my adult life, but now it's just gone. I had 3 discs in my lower back that were ruptured. In 2019, it was reconfirmed with a CT scan. They were still gone, and I lost enough weight at that point. For a while, I put it back on, but at that point, I lost enough. They were willing to look at doing the surgery to fuse my lower back. And then when I'd put on weight, obviously I couldn't do it. And then when I lost the weight again, then I went back and asked to get scanned again. This time they did an MRI, and when they did the MRI on my lower back, all the discs were in almost perfect condition.
Wow.
I
Wonderful.
was That's as far as I knew that wasn't possible, but
Huh.
yeah, it happened, and I've got the receipts. So
Mhm. Great.
yeah, absolutely amazing stuff. And I remember the day that I decided this is real, this is working, it's going to last. time to get rid of the wheelchair. So we took the wheelchair back. That was a big day. And then we went, well, I think we can get out of this wheelchair accessible apartment and get a real place. And got put on the waiting list. And 2 or 3 months later, we were moved.
Great.
And living a normal life, dreams that I had given up on that I knew could never happen were suddenly back on the table.
It's fantastic.
And I remember my wife made a comment one day as I was cooking us our supper. She said she was so grateful to have her husband back. She'd been my primary caregiver for 15 years. An absolutely amazing woman, loyalty and caring like I've never seen in another human being, which is probably why I married her. But yeah, it's been a heck of a journey, and I'm so grateful for the chance that I had to be able to heal, and I'm even more grateful for the chance to share my story and help other people. I helped one lady in particular who was also a myasthenia gravis sufferer. She had found me on a myasthenia gravis group on Facebook and tracked me down. and she phoned me. Not quite sure how she tracked me down, but I get a phone call from this lady, and she was in intensive care in the hospital. She was a nurse, and she was in a major, they just diagnosed her a couple days earlier with the myasthenia gravis, and she was going downhill fast. And gave her the information. I talked with her on the phone for a couple hours, and we talked a few more times after that. As soon as she got out of the hospital, she went carnivore, and within weeks, her symptoms were gone.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. How long ago was that? Is she still on carnivore?
She's still carnivore. Yeah. Just try to remember how long ago it was that she first contacted me. I think it was about 1.5 years ago, somewhere in there. Yeah. And yeah, it's funny, some of the groups where I was trying, when this was first happening, I was pretty excited and wanted to share with everybody. And what I discovered is that a lot of those myasthenia gravis and autoimmune disease groups are run by doctors. And if you even mention that a proper diet can actually create remission for your disease, they turf you from the group usually. I don't know how many groups I was kicked out of for that.
Yep, I've been kicked out of groups too.
Didn't want to hear it, didn't want to accept it.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of the saddest things I ran across early on in this journey was there was this one guy that I had been talking to in one of the myasthenia groups. And he had been trying various things, and he had heard about me using vitamins to help the condition, as well as some other techniques of restoring gut health with medicinal mushrooms, which also helps regulate the immune system better. So I was getting some degree of success. So he had contacted me for more information, and I'd given him the information. And then, of course, when I went carnivore and suddenly went into full remission, of course, I shared it. And he actually tried it for a little bit, and it worked. But then his church group started working on him, and other friends started working on him, and he was convinced that, no, God wants him to be a vegetarian, and God will heal him miraculously. So he kept going off the carnivore diet, and within days, every time he was back in the hospital in a myasthenia crisis. And his wife was just sick. She could see that it was working, and she saw how it worked on him when he tried it. But he just had some kind of a mental block that was religion-based. And I mean, the religion I belong to, they're not exactly vegetarian, but they believe in eating small amounts of meat and fat, and then a balanced diet for the rest of it. But they gave me no static at all when I announced I was going carnivore, because normally this, in our church, it's called the word of wisdom. And to be worthy to be able to go to the temple and do temple ordinances and stuff, you have to keep this word of wisdom, or this, which also included no smoking, no drinking coffee, that kind of thing. So, but they're a heck of a lot more flexible when they see that there is a medical need. They don't have an issue with it. And I could have even, if I had wanted to, I could have even gotten my temple recommended. Wouldn't have been an issue. And they don't try and override common sense. It's a guideline that works for most people, but in this day, this modern day of ultra processed foods that didn't exist when that word of wisdom was created in the early 1800s, right? So this kind of stuff didn't exist. So I don't think they anticipated what was going to happen to our food supply. So consequently, they don't have an issue with it. And it was so unfortunate that this other religious group just grabbed onto this guy and convinced him to give up the path to healing. And I even tried kind of one of the stories that our church leaders use, and a lot of church leaders from other religions use as well. The story about the man caught in the flood. So basically, the story goes that man's caught in a flood. He prays to be rescued, and a little while later, a bus shows up and says, "We're taking people out of here. We're evacuating. Get on the bus." And so, "Oh, God's going to rescue me. I'm looked after. You go ahead." And then the water's rising. And a while later, a boat comes putting by and tried to rescue him, and he gave him the same answer. So a little while later, he's standing in front of God in heaven, and he asks, "I trusted you to save me. Why didn't you save me?" And God tells him, "Well, I sent you a bus and I sent you a boat. What more did you want?" So, he was sent a message, and he was sent a path to healing, and he couldn't overcome the pull of the people that were just always at him. And it was unfortunate, and I wound up losing him and his wife as friends over it, and it was so unfortunate.
That is a shame.
Yeah, I was so sad. Now, admittedly, I didn't handle it very well when it was happening. Sometimes I get overwhelmed by these situations. My Asperger's can still, even though the symptoms have reduced with carnivore, it still exists, and I still have issues understanding social cues and picking up on things. Most of the OCD issues I had with it are gone. Luckily, about 90% gone. I have very, very few issues with OCD now. But so it was a bit of a struggle, kind of getting through that and seeing someone choosing horrible health for no good reason. But I guess it was an important reason to them, and if they were willing to sacrifice their health for their beliefs, okay, I don't have to like it, and I can be sad for them. But unfortunately, it's a similar story to many people I've met. They see the changes I've made, and they get excited, and they want to know how I did it. And then I tell them, and then they're not so excited about all the stuff they got to give up, and they're just not willing to do it. They'd rather stay sick and eat the food they like, than to make a change.
Very sad.
And it's funny how people growing up, they just automatically believe all that stuff that's told to them, yet they want endless amounts of evidence when you try and show them a new path. And no amount of evidence is enough for most people. It's so unfortunate. I don't like to use the word brainwashing, but it's really what it is. The brainwashing, the programming, whatever you want to call it, that starts at childhood is scary. what it's doing to our society, what it's doing to health. 60% of North Americans are overweight or obese, and 40% have serious chronic illness and metabolic dysfunction. And these things didn't exist 100 years ago. Yeah, technically they existed, but they were so rare you never heard about it. If you look at film taken from when the soldiers returned home after World War II, you look at those huge crowds that they filmed in Times Square, you will be very hard pressed to find a single fat person in that crowd. But, the Ansel Keys did his 7-country study in the 50s, and then in the 70s, we got the official food guide. And ever since that came out and people started following the guide, that's when this happened. All these diseases and health problems just rose in lockstep with the change in our food supply. And it's a very unfortunate reality. And I wish at some point someone would get held responsible, because in my view, what they're doing is criminal. Now, legally, that's maybe not true, but ethically and morally, what they're doing is completely wrong. The pharmaceutical companies fund the medical schools. The medical schools train the doctors the way the pharmaceutical companies want them trained. And they come out of medical school isolating individual symptoms, treating those, and ignoring the underlying cause. And it's been fueled by massive lobbying from these food companies to get the regulations with food set up the way they want them, so for maximum profits. And they know darn well it makes people sick and that the food is addictive, because the same people that run the big food corporations now used to run the cigarette companies. They know addiction very well. And they use it to their advantage, and they use it to help themselves, and they use it to help the insurance companies, and they use it to help big pharma. And I know it sounds like I'm wearing a tinfoil hat, but once you've seen the evidence, you can't unsee it. And I'm living proof that the principles I'm talking about are true. And there are literally hundreds of thousands of people in the keto and carnivore communities healing many diseases that typically do not respond to traditional medical treatment. And yet we're making them go away with simple diet. And they don't want to hear it. It scares them because they see their profit model being destroyed. And they're fighting against it tooth and claw. Like here in Canada, after the pandemic, the government actually passed a law that when the next pandemic happens, meat production will be outlawed.
What?
For the duration of the pandemic.
Really?
Yeah, because their excuse is that it's a disease vector with people working in the plants processing the meat. So that's their excuse for taking away meat. Meat's the only thing they're going to take away. Everything else is fine. You'll be able to go to the grocery store just like last time and buy all the food you want, as long as it's not meat. So they're actually trying to outlaw people being able to use meat, and they're doing everything they can to block natural supplements the best they can, and make the regulations and taxes so onerous that nobody wants to sell natural supplements in Canada anymore. It's getting ridiculously hard to get certain things. Like I take a mineral supplement for my thyroid, so it keeps my thyroid in check. So, I take NAC, 900 milligrams a day, and I take 200 micrograms of selenium a day. And that keeps my TSH, T4, T3, keeps all that normal. And, if they block us being able to get stuff like that, they're doing it because it'll force us back onto medications, onto pharmaceuticals, which is what they want. And as carnivores, especially those of us who have been going through major healing, I feel it's our responsibility to fight this, to educate our politicians, to educate our local representatives, and make them aware of what's going on. Now, it's a lot easier in the US now because of the change in government there. But, unfortunately, we just had an election and the people made the wrong choice, or certainly a choice that is not going to benefit most people. So it's unfortunate. I'm not trying to get into a political discussion here, but this is the reality of our lives and our healing journey. We've got to be able to fight for what we know is right and what we know works. So we've got to be prepared to, go talk to your local politicians and tell them your story, show them how this works, and, how many people would be hurt if this went away. And, we need to do that if we want to have a future, because they're fighting it hard. They keep these mainstream media or legacy media keeps bringing out these old studies that have been thoroughly debunked, but they keep trotting them out and scaring people. Every time a new study comes out that shows that narrative is false and that keto or low carb is the way to go, they're trying to counter it as much as they can. And they've stepped up lobbying efforts, and they're trying desperately in the States to save all this stuff that they've been doing. And they might. Trump is trying hard to put an end to it, but they're getting a lot of pushback from all corners, and it scares me to see it. Because Canada is so affected by politics in the States, I'm pretty up on what's happening with politics in the States. And it's stuff going on in North America right now is kind of scary as far as beef goes. I mean, you've got some states that I shouldn't say some. I know one in particular, and others have laws in the works, but one state in particular just outlawed people being able to drink their own unpasteurized raw milk from their own cow on their own farm. Yeah. Really? They've made it illegal in one state. I'm not sure which state it is. And other states are following suit. They're drawing up the same kind of laws right now because of all the studies that have come out recently showing the damage that pasteurized milk does to the population. You need those raw bacteria and enzymes and stuff that come in unpasteurized milk if you're going to drink milk. So it's scary stuff. It's not just about finding health and healing. Once we find it, we have to fight to keep it. And not everybody's going to be prepared to do that. I understand, but some of us, we're going to try.
Wow. Well, your story is really moving, engaging, fascinating, wonderful. I'm curious why no medical professional has decided to study you and bring you to the next medical convention as a miracle man.
Oh, I know. Like my family doctor, I tried to bring him in the research, the newer research that debunks most of what he was preaching to me. And he said, I can't look at that. He said, I'm not allowed to look at it.
That's
the
the
Alberta
point.
Medical Association, they set what publications he is allowed to use in his practice.
Yep.
So they tell him what he's allowed to study, what he's allowed to learn. And he is not allowed to study anything that goes against the narrative. And he's seen me do this to him enough times where he's told me I need a medication. I say, let me find another solution. And I do. And he's like, I don't know how this is possible, but he's finally reached a point where he's not trying to talk me at a carnivore anymore. He says, look, I can see that you're determined. You've been doing this for a long time now, and it's working. So I got nothing more to say, basically.
Good. Good for
So
him.
yeah,
Yeah, and good for you too. It's I've had doctors explain to me how if I resist taking statins, for instance, that's kind of a black mark against him with the insurance companies who are
yeah,
influenced by big pharma, and it's just virtually no way around it. And I had one doctor in particular left an organized practice and went to another one where there was less pressure, but don't you know that one got taken over by a similar company that had the same
yeah,
regimentation about what you can do and can't do and how you're supposed to prescribe. It's very defeating for
yeah,
them, and they're thinking human beings and not dummies. They can see black from white, and I think it's very frustrating, and
yeah.
I'm hoping that it breaks soon, that we can get through to them.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that the medical system, they don't want to change. They want things to stay the way they are. And they don't want people finding solutions. They don't want people getting better because it's not profitable.
Exactly.
Um, I read an interesting article about 4 or 5 years ago, um, right after I got off all the morphine and stuff. And it was about how research dollars with the financial institutions are allocated um, for research, medical research. And they had funded a study that purported to have a cure for a certain type of cancer. I don't remember which specific cancer it was. The treatment was effective. It worked. People are still being helped today, but there wasn't a lot of profit because it worked so well. So the bank, they had a big meeting with the other banks, and they said, we can no longer fund these research programs unless they're going to be developing medications that will have long-term use. So they actually said the quiet part out loud. And that's kind of how it started, with the financial institutions withholding funding to anyone that didn't want to do the research they wanted to see done.
It's so endemic. It's just so ingrained, imprinted, and scary. But I think a lot of adults are taking on carnivore and understanding why it works. And hopefully we will see some change.
Yeah, the space has just exploded since I started. Like there was a few people doing it when I started, of course, but the numbers. I mean, the increase I've seen in the numbers in the groups and following the YouTube channels and stuff, it's phenomenal. It's just exploding. People are
Yes.
finding out the truth,
Yeah, it's very
and
gratifying.
yeah, the big corporations are scared.
Good. Good for us. And too bad
Yep.
for them. Oh dear. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing. Is there anything you'd like to say to people who are hesitating about carnivore, who might want just another little push in the direction? Would you advise
Okay.
that?
Um, Let me say this. Um, Now, Christians probably won't listen to what I'm about to say. Um, I have a little different set of beliefs because I still believe in good, properly done science, and stuff from the Bible and from religions isn't always historically accurate, especially with timelines and stuff, right? So, that said, and out of the way, archaeological evidence has been very clear that until about 12,000 years ago, human beings were carnivore for like almost 200,000 years. And they might not be, humans that we would necessarily think of today, but they were officially humans, and they were carnivore. And when grain farming and agriculture started to become a thing, we didn't see a lot of negative from it right away, but as society progressed and they started having these foods available all the time, and they were refining these foods and starting to process them. A good example I can give you is Egypt. So if you look back in history of Egypt and you look at the horrible chronic diseases they were going through in their society, especially the elites that could afford all the grains and the fancy cakes and the sweets and the honey and all this stuff. And their health was just destroyed when they started eating this stuff. Same as modern people.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot of difference.
Yeah.
And, you know, that kind of evidence is pretty hard to deny. And, you know, you see there's tribes still today, like the Maasai tribe in Africa, for instance, right? They're still carnivore. They drink milk, they drink blood, and they eat meat and fat, and they drink water. That's it. They don't add anything else. They're tall, they're strong, they're fast. And the neighboring tribe, who are genetically identical, but have switched to modern foods, they're shorter, they're sicklier, they're weaker, physically smaller. But if someone from the other tribe marries into the Maasai tribe and moves there and takes on their lifestyle, they heal. So there's some evidence, some pretty undeniable evidence right there. There is nothing that your body requires that you can't get from meat and fat. It's just the way it works. A lot of these vitamins that people say you need, like vitamin C and stuff, are only required when you're eating a bunch of plants because of the oxidative damage to your system. So you need vitamin C and antioxidant qualities it has. But when you're carnivore, you don't need it. You don't need supplemental vitamin C. And you'll notice that many of us carnivores have been carnivore for many years. None of us have scurvy. None of us are dropping dead of heart attacks. So I would say this: if you are having some serious health issues, give it a try for 90 days. You've got nothing to lose but bad health, and you've got everything to gain. Now, if after 90 days you don't like it, it doesn't work for you, you're free to go back to eating the way you were. There's, no harm done, right? But as fast as I saw benefits, other people sometimes take a little longer. Some people see benefits faster. But 90 days seems to be the standard, that if you go 90 days, if you haven't seen health benefits by then, you're probably not going to. There's lots of people out there that are going to come at you about this. They're going to be trying to save you from dying of a heart attack from the carnivore diet. But when I started this thing, my doctor told me if I kept eating carnivore, I'd have a heart attack in 6 months. And that was, 28 months ago. We've got Maggie, the rancher in Alberta, who's in her 80s, has been carnivore for 50 years. And when Carrie and Dr. Chafee were filming the documentary with her, they couldn't keep up with her. She was working so hard, they had to keep stopping and resting while she continued working. This lady is absolutely incredible. And she looks like she's in her late 40s, not her 80s.
Yes.
It's amazing. I mean,
right.
Genetically, human beings should be living to about 120, not 70 or 80. And
that's my plan.
Yeah, me too. I mean, if we're eating a proper human diet, I'm basically middle-aged now. My life is completely changed. My life expectancy has dramatically improved. And I find it kind of amusing when I get doctors coming at me, trying to save me. And despite all the healing that's happened in my life and how much healthier I am now, they're just convinced I'm killing myself. And you'll have to be your own judge. But I have seen many carnivores who've been carnivore for years go and get a test called a CAC test that actually tests your arteries for plaque. They can see it If there's plaque there, they'll find it. Most people who've been carnivore 2 or more years get an almost 0 on the CAC. There is no plaque.
That's me. I'm
Yeah.
7-year carnivore. I've had 3 CACs, all of them 0. And I
Yeah.
used to weigh 300 pounds. And my doctor's just flabbergasted.
Yeah, exactly. What it's the sad thing is even some doctors that are in the keto space are still kind of militantly doctors. And if they see something they don't agree with on somebody's post, even if they're quoting another doctor in the space, they'll attack for some silly little semantic thing. And if you dare call them out on it and show them the evidence that they were wrong, like actually give them a link to a government website that shows what you're talking about, they won't even look at it, and they double down and they don't you know who I am? How dare you question me? I'm a blah 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 kind of doctor, and you know nothing. And it's like, okay, you had what, 12, 13 years of medical education? Well, I've had 40 plus years of dealing with bad health and crappy doctors. And I've healed things that aren't supposed to be able to be healed. And you're going to pass judgment on my intelligence? Yeah, I mean,
There's some ego involved there.
Yeah, I'm capable of grabbing a dictionary and reading a medical report, right? Like, I mean, when I took my computer programming and systems analysis in 1991, I graduated with honors, 94.8%. And I think I know how to research and read and study.
Yeah.
And, I'm not going to call them out. I already did that on my own social media. I'm not going to call them out here, but we need to be better in this space. People that are in the keto and carnivore space, especially those in positions of influence like this fellow is, you're trying to help people, not turn people off. And it's unfortunate. Maybe we caught him on a bad day. That's entirely possible. But from the feedback I've gotten from other people that know this guy, it's a pattern of behavior that he's well known for creating controversy for clicks. And
it's unfortunate.
I'm not convinced that's the best way to approach people that are trying to get into this and trying to learn. To just attack people like that and create controversy for your own, to benefit yourself and not the people you're purporting to help, is unfortunate. Yeah. And, I had a few people defending him, that he knows what he's talking about. Maybe he does. But that doesn't excuse that type of behavior. And I would encourage anybody who's in the influencer space in this area, please, don't attack people. If they're wrong, that's fine. Explain it to them. Explain the facts. Don't just attack them and tell them what you're saying is a lie. And then doubling down when they're shown to be wrong. Like that's not a way to win friends and influence people. I'm sorry, it just isn't. Maybe they should do some studying and read a book by Dale Carnegie called How to Win Friends and Influence People. They might benefit from that.
One of my favorites.
I think he spent too much time reading Think and Grow Rich instead by Napoleon Hill.
I read that one too. Not working.
Yeah.
Well, Dave, thank you so much. I want to ask you if people wanted to get in touch with you or to follow you and see what more you have to say, how can they best do that?
Well, probably the best thing is to go to my website, and I've got links to all my stuff in there on the contact page. So if you look at how my nickname is spelt, Fuzzy D, on the screen there. For those
F-U-Z-Z-E-E.
for those who are listening, it's spelled F-U-Z-Z-E-E-D-E-E. So Fuzzy D spelt a little funny. So if you go to fuzzyroad2health.com, and that'll get you there. And of course, I'm Fuzzy D. Old nickname
Okay.
that just became a marketing thing for whatever reason.
Okay. We'll put that in the notes below the broadcast.
Now I've got a YouTube channel
Mhm.
where I talk about my health journey. I haven't posted there very much in a while. I'm dealing with an issue with my neck. I've got surgery soon, so I haven't wanted to do a lot. And then I realized that maybe I should be sharing my struggles with people, so they see that it other people suffer through it and that it can be overcome. So, so I made a decision, and I'm starting to make a few more videos, even if it's a little painful to do it at
Well,
the moment.
thank you for that. Certainly are inspiring.
Yeah, I've gotten comments from people like, "Oh, you're so strong," and stuff like that, and it's like I don't feel comfortable with that. I don't see myself that way. I don't see myself as particularly strong or particularly smart. I was in this situation. I was living it. I had no choice. So it's not like I'm better than anyone else or stronger than anyone else. It was just my life, and I didn't have a choice but to deal with it. So I did. And maybe not everybody can do that, but I think most people could. And so I don't see myself as being particularly strong. What I am is grateful for the second chance I've been given, and grateful for a chance to help other people. And I've certainly gone through lots of different levels and plateaus of how I think about things since I started this journey. Spent a few months being angry when I started learning the truth for all the time I'd lost over greed in politics. But I realized that helps no one, and the best solution is to just educate and help others. So that's my goal, and I hope I've worked towards that goal a little more today.
Well, I think so. Really appreciate your speaking to us and sharing your truth with us.
Happy to do it. Anytime somebody wants me to come and talk about this, I'm happy to do it.
Great. Thank you, Dave.
Well, absolutely. Happy
Okay,
to be
we're
here.
going to sign off now. Take care. Bye-bye.
See ya.